we mustn't take...
Since I got the mic, it's Dave Haskins here from Metro. Good morning to the panel there. I was trying to find a question here, but I've got a couple of comments on picking up on things that are going in. Specifically, John Dowie, we put in bids in at lunchtime today for £300 million worth of transport projects from the city region. The things that have been talked about here around sustainability, identified need, jobs, getting people moving, businesses, all hit the chord here with these. Behind you, there's Leeds Transport Strategy on the screen, very coherent transport strategy. I'd like to point out we've come a long, long way now in listening to what you've been saying in central government about devolution, getting more money forward locally. Of the £300 million of projects, we've come up with around 100 million locally. And we're looking to use tax increment financing as well, government tool, to bring those projects forward. So there's been a long history of transport underinvestment in the Leeds City region. And I'd like, maybe there's a comment from the panel about how they'd like to see that redressed through these sustainable projects and other projects. And I also welcome the way forward on devolution there.
Okay, I think that's more of a statement, I think, yeah. So I welcome that statement. Can we now go to somebody who's been very patient down at the front here? Thank you.
Nick Milner says it's a change for me to be very patient. Sandy Needham, Bradford Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to ask a question to the two Johns. John because of government and the investment in transport, and John Parkin because of being a LEP board member. There is no doubt at all that transport is one of the two biggest issues that business is looking to the Leeds City region to address. And yet, in this country, we have a problem over transport. We have been consulted, I don't know how many times, on local transport plans, 3-year plans. We all know that if you're talking about transport, 3 years is not good enough. And government always looks for a win within a term of office. So the priorities always seem to be quick wins when we're looking for long-term solutions. So is government going to change, and is there going to be devolution and more help? Because if it's really having an impact on the economy, which we believe it is, then how are we going to get the economy growing unless that happens? And for John Parkin, is the Leeds City Region LEP going to stick to doing a strategy that is 20 years long, that will deliver some of the priorities that are in that strategy on the screen?
We'll start off with John, yeah.
Well, I'd make a statement of LEP policy. I can make a comment, and personally, my own view on it is that we need to have a framework on transport which stretches out for several decades, but that we also need to identify those shorter term and medium term wins that can enable that longer term strategy to actually get traction. And I think we have a range of options to do that, and I'm sure those will emerge during the debate today and a session a little later on. They're already in discussion around the table when we get together as a LEP and with colleagues supporting the LEP. And I don't think we necessarily need to go through massive amounts of reinvention of previous analysis that's gone on and previous policy statements. There are some very sensible things in there that we can do. I think the most important thing is how do we get planning and the political will together, and the LEP's will aligned and the will of the region aligned to say these are the things we're going to do, now let's get on with it. And that's a simple statement to make because there are things like funding to deal with in very difficult economic times. But surely that has to be the right style of approach, and making some of these things that we've talked about for quite a while actually happen. And I think a key feature isn't just an observation in judging the merits of particular schemes and options available to us, some of which are in the city region strategy and have been there for a while, is how can we do things which actually connect up and enable existing infrastructure to deliver at a much more optimized level than it does today. And actually that's not a bad place to start if you can take advantage of investment that's already there and has already gone in, rather than looking at the sort of total greenfield site approach of putting something entirely new in place, which will have its place, no doubt, in wider and longer term views. But we do have, I think, to get to this part of the thinking which says, well, let's identify some of these things in the shorter term and get on with them. But there has to be that longer term framework, otherwise it won't make sense in 30 years' time.
Okay. I'll come to other members of that. I know you restricted it to 2 Johns, but I'm sure Brendan and Jim would have something to say. John?
Oh, right.
No,
I was about to relax again.
No, don't relax.
I think there was a lot of sense in what you've just said. That is, yes, a longer-term vision, but there is a real importance in the small-scale interventions which can get lost sight of in the search for the big solution. And there's a lot of history and a lot of central government at fault in that history. But one problem the Leeds City region has had in recent decades is the search for the big solution, which, when the big solution didn't come about for various reasons, was a real knockback for the city region because you hadn't been in the same way progressing a lot of the small interventions. So getting on, demonstrating successes is really important. Going to the beginning of your question on devolution, there are many losses for central government in devolution. Some of them are about the ability to prioritise a given finite pot of resources across all of England and decide where it should go to maximise the return. But some of it is cutting ribbons. And ministers realise that's one of the things they'll be giving up, the ability to themselves decide which ribbon to cut and personally associate themselves with it, because you'll be cutting the ribbon, not us.
Okay. Some quick comments from Brendan?
Yeah, I mean, I think I remember when I was chairing this group in high-speed rail, and Jim was very helpful a few years ago. One of the things became clear, and it's been touched on, I think, to a degree, is that you can't look at individual components on their own. There's a transport infrastructure in the region, ranging from, I'm a keen cyclist, people on bikes at one very, very small extreme level through to the big stuff. And I think the only possibility for creating that long-term vision exists in this room, because you can't do it for them, and that's not going to happen, right? It needs to look at all components, and I think critically look at investment in X, for example, a local rail network that doesn't just stop in the city but goes through to Bradford, Halifax, and so on, can have a positive short-term impact in some other stuff that reshapes investment. So I think there's a long-term strategy, there's short-term investment in projects, and critically measure the impact and just try and balance it all together. And I think it's absolutely vital. I mean, but I think it'll have to happen in here, because no one will do it for you.
I'd just add, and just on the point about high-speed rail, of course, this is one area where government is taking an incredibly long-term view. And it's looking to the city regions, the places that are going to get these new high-speed rail services, exactly the point Brenda's just made, to come along with it, with the integration measures that are really going to deliver the full set of benefits. And the point I alluded to earlier is, please don't think in this city region, and this is speaking as a director of Green Gauge and the work we've done on high-speed rail, please don't think of this as being in the 2030s. Therefore, even however wonderfully long-term you're encouraging people to think, most people, I suspect, will say, well, it's a hell of a long way away to stimulate the economy. The point I want to make is this, that it is possible and perfectly feasible to connect Sheffield and Leeds into the first stage of high-speed rail, which is due for the mid-2020s. And the experience with high-speed rail is that development, once the plans are set, starts many years before it comes, in anticipation of the benefits it will bring. And if you took the French experience, it would be 7 years before the thing opens. So that's actually back into this decade. So, yeah, you've got to think long-term as to what you want to do, but you can reel it back, as I think other people have been saying, to what are we going to do in the meantime, how are we going to get there? And it does come back to this point about integrating development, and you obviously have fantastic opportunities in the heart of Bradford to achieve that.
Okay, we've got time for a couple of quick questions before we move on. I can see, I'll come back to you if we can, but I'm trying to get people who haven't asked a question, or one at the back, please. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Janet O'Neill from O'Neill Planning Associates in York. I had to come back and respond to the lady on my right who was talking about whether it's planning or transport that's the agenda. Planning doesn't operate in its own special vacuum. The planning system was devised and approved by elected MPs. The local decisions and the local development plans are approved by elected councillors. Planners are servants to the elected decision makers. They're not people who just stand on their own and are totally independent. The point that was made is it planning or transport? Of course, transport is part of spatial planning, and that's what the gentleman was just talking about, integrated planning. The problem that there is now with the planning system, the difficulty is that this government have promised people localism, that they can decide, neighbourhoods or local areas can make the decisions for them. The regional spatial strategies are not going to dictate that. But the difficulty is that George Osborne also has a pro-growth agenda.
Are we coming to a question?
Yes.
It
Yes,
is interesting stuff. It is helpful.
Yes, okay. I'm coming to a
We
question,
are
sorry.
running out of time.
Okay. What I want to ask the panel people is how they think that the local authorities that were within this region are going to resolve the dilemma of localism that local people want and expect and the pro-growth agenda that's coming from government.
Okay. Again, if we can be... I suppose, John, you're going to have to take this first on, but again, given that we've got... try and get another question after this.
Yeah.
Can we do it?
I hesitate to say how you're going to resolve that challenge. It is absolutely the heart of the challenge facing all local communities right across the country. And you know, they're going to have to find their own balance between the two.
Yeah.
Okay. Quickly.
Well, I think it's back to this term sustainable economic growth. I don't think it's a question of localism or growth. We've got to find a way of doing both. And that's the political challenge, I think.
All right, we'll try and take... I will try, but there's another person who hasn't spoken yet. Are you okay with that? So, a question to our colleague, yeah.
Thank you. Brian Dunsby, Harrogate Chamber of Trade and Commerce. Can I reinforce John Parkin's comments about the importance of connectivity to London Heathrow? This is vital not just for people wanting to visit London, no. It's for the international long-haul connectivity of this country, this region, to the rest of the world, and particularly the Americas and the Far East. We are disadvantaged relative to Newcastle and Manchester, and we really must press British Airways to reinstate a frequent shuttle service from Leeds Bradford to Terminal 5, and that requires a lot of political pressure. Can everyone please put that high on the agenda for this region? Thank you.
I'll take that as a statement. Fine.